And welcome to another edition of New Track Record. Caleb Hatch and Justin Kinney back with you. Hello, Justin.
Hello, Mr. Hatch. How are you?
Doing well. Yourself?
Hey, we're doing well here. It's race week. Haven't been able to say that for a couple weeks.
Yes, and it's also a holiday weekend for those of us in the States. Independence Day is the holiday, not the 4th of July. That's a fun fact for news people.
Yes. Don't confuse the two. They're used pretty interchangeably, but they shouldn't be.
The Honda 200 coming up at the Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course on Sunday, July 3rd. We'll have a preview of that later in the show. But we kick things off, a ton of silly season tidbits, not necessarily juicy rumors, but just more confirmation and insight into things that we've already been talking about. And I think we'll start with, I think, probably the most prominent driver in a lot of these conversations, Scott Dixon, Nathan Brown of the Indianapolis Star. I had an interview with Dixon the other day as we record this on Thursday, June 30th, ahead of the holiday weekend here in the U.S. Scott Dixon saying, honestly, I don't see anything changing in what I'm doing currently for the next 5 years at least. So retirement talk, you can throw that out the window. Also, he says that I'm not sure where the conversations are coming from in regards to Aero McLaren SP. Dixon says, I haven't been part of any of these conversations, so not really sure where a lot of these things came from. Obviously, a lot of people talk. Even got a few messages from people asking about the same thing. If people are having these conversations, I haven't been a part of them. And he says he's focusing on the season. That's all I've got to say. There's really nothing to it. So we can cross off retirement talk. We can cross off him going to Aero McLaren SP, right?
Yeah, and I felt like the McLaren stuff anyway was kind of a long shot with him and Alex Palou, considering both are under contract for 2023. I don't know if I'm going to say Scott Dixon isn't going anyway for the next 5 years because he hasn't won a race this year. I mean, if that stretch continues, let's say through the rest of the season and the next season, and he's facing a couple years without a win, then maybe he's reevaluating, right? I don't think Chip Ganassi's ever going to say, Scott Dixon, we don't want you here. And so in that respect, I'm not surprised. Were there conversations ever had between McLaren and Scott Dixon? Maybe, maybe not. I don't put a lot of stock in any kind of driver that says there was no discussions, because if he's not going anywhere, why would he admit there was discussion? So I'm not saying, there seemed to be smoke with that, but I don't know how much fire, right, between him and Alex Palou.
Yeah, and while Dixon, you could almost assuredly say that he didn't have those conversations, but
maybe his
manager, Stefan Johansson, probably at least entertained calls, messages, whatnot about it. And you mentioned Dixon still winless on the season. That would end his consecutive seasons with a win at 17. Also, different seasons with at least one victory. He has 19 total in his career. So that's kind of the thing on the agenda, and I think that's what he's focused on after a disappointing Indianapolis 500, whereas everything before that went swimmingly yet again for Dixon, but still no win, second win, the Indy 500. We can cross him off the list for Aero McLaren, any of the rumors, and move forward. Next guy on the list, Rinus Veekay. And Nathan Brown, also the Indy Star, another article talking about Rinus Veekay. Obviously a critical stretch for him. Last year, Mid-Ohio was the race where he came back from injury and he was beat out by his teammate Connor Daly in every single race, if I'm not mistaken, since his return. Veekay obviously trying to find some better form compared to what he ended last season with, and then the struggles he's had this season since the Indy GP, where it's been pretty difficult for him in getting results. And you look at what he did last year, again, you got to remember he picked up that first win, but then after coming back at Mid-Ohio, no top 15 finishes, so not even top 10 or top 5, no top 15 finishes. And Connor Daly, yes, did outperform him at all these race weekends. So, I mean, that really says a lot about what he wants to do, what he needs to do, and what he had to say as far as where things are at. And really you get into where conversations are for the future for Rinus Veekay. And I think that's the ultimate question. So last week, Veekay told INDYCAR his manager, Adrian Sussman, will be at Mid-Ohio undoubtedly to handle some in-person meetings regarding Veekay's future. Sussman has represented legends of the sport that included Dario Franchitti and the late Dan Weldon. Veekay said he and Sussman speak on the phone once or twice a week regarding his future plans, though his contract prevents formal negotiations with teams other than Ed Carpenter Racing before August 1st. None of this is a big surprise, right? We speculated on this, and that kind of rumor leaked out in the months prior. But this is another situation where, yeah, maybe he can't have formal negotiations or his manager can't have, but they can have discussions. They can talk, right? And talk leads to something. We all agree that he is probably the top candidate for Arrow McLaren SP of the drivers that would actually be available, right?
Right now, yeah, it is semantics. Like you said, first with Scott Dixon, yeah, he may not be having conversations, but manager may be. And then here, yeah, he can't negotiate till August 1st, but simple handshake is all it takes to really, lock in a deal before you can officially sign anything. But you look at Rinus Veekay, and you mentioned after his injury last year and coming back and really struggling through the second half of 2021 and even 2022, here we are, he has just 3 top 10s, and those came in the first 4 races. And since Alabama at Barber with that third place finish, it's been 23rd, 33rd, 16th, 17th, and he has fallen to 14th in the standings. So feels like light years away from the start of the season last year to now with Rinus Veekay. And I think we're seeing the potential here or there, but since the injury, since he missed Road America last year, there's been a lot of inconsistency, both at the end of last year and through the first 8 races of this season.
I mean, to me, you got to focus on getting results now ahead of what you can do for next year. And it's tough, right? Because you don't feel settled, and you may not get as good results because you're probably pressing a little bit while you're driving. And maybe that's what we're seeing right now is he knows he's in a contract year. He's pressing a bit. And that's where some of those mistakes can creep in.
I mean, he can talk to Alexander Rossi about that. I think, for the better part of the last couple of years, Alexander Rossi has kind of been pushing when he's had the opportunity to get good finishes. So Rinus Veekay just needs to go out and take care of business. And whether that's, come home 8th when you have an 8th place car, or compete for a win if you have a car that can compete for a dub, then do that. But he cannot continue to be irrelevant and, wreck cars and, underperform on track when he has the opportunity to be better.
Well, and let's not forget the one race that's worth double points he finished last in. So that's a killer for your championship.
Yeah, it doesn't help. And the fact that, right now 14th in points, he finished 12th last year, even with those struggles after the injury. He needs to do better, because I think the expectation for everybody for Rinus Veekay after last year was he would at least be in the top 10 in points this year, and he's out of that spot right now.
All right, so the team we haven't necessarily mentioned by name, but a lot of this has danced around this team as far as McLaren's looking into poach from another team, and Racer.com, Marshall Pruitt. Ganassi planning status quo for 2023. He expects all 4 drivers to return. Jimmy Johnson not announced his plans for next season, but Ganassi says he expects everything to stay the same. He says, my guys are under contract. I asked them if everything's okay, and they said, yeah, everything's okay. I'm not sure what else to say. But naturally, as always, the last paragraph gets quite juicy. I can tell you this, Chip added, I learned a long time ago in this business that you can't build your team by taking people from other teams. You can't build a team that way. You've got to develop your own drivers, your own people. Well, let me just be the first to say that Ed Jones had a handshake deal with Dale Coyne Racing before Chip Ganassi Racing poached him away a few seasons ago. So.
Right. I feel like this is, we're not talking Andretti Autosport here in terms of Chip Ganassi Racing. This team does not have a fight in the road to Indy. So you could say in terms of developing talent, they're not involved in doing that either, just like McLaren in terms of the road to Indy. So I understand the dig, but I feel like McLaren is just trying to hire the best drivers it possibly can. And if it sniffs around Chip Ganassi with Alex Palou and Scott Dixon, then if you don't have anything to worry about, then what's the issue? But I love the angst and potential rivalry that has started to build between Chip Ganassi and McLaren, in particular Zach Brown. I don't think they're very big fans of each other.
No, but this is at least some intrigue because, like you said, what team isn't going to try to hire the best driver that they can? No matter what team. I mean, you're always going to at least try. Now, you know that you probably can't afford certain drivers when they're on the market as a free agent, but it's worth the shot. It's worth the conversation. And like you said, Aaron McLaren is just trying to hire the best people they can, just like Ganassi is trying to hire the best people they can.
Right. And the loose definition of poaching and not developing talent, you could say Team Penske is the biggest poacher, right? They don't really develop talent. They're not in the road to Indy. They're hiring guys that have performed well elsewhere. I mean, Scott McLaughlin is a rarity in that respect. So by definition, Team Penske is the worst offender at poaching.
Yeah, and Scott McLaughlin, the name you mentioned, he was the one guy who wasn't poached because
he was developed,
with a Penske partner team in supercars.
Yeah, so I appreciate Chip's comment. I know how it was directed, but poaching is kind of like recruiting, throwing out that magical recruiting word, right? Is everybody's kind of doing it. You're just trying to hire the best lineup you possibly can. And if that means other teams are trying to go after your drivers, it's kind of a testament to your organization, right?
Absolutely. So that's it on Ganassi, status quo. Oh, and we forgot one other team where we expect the status quo. Not that this is a surprise. This seemed like a given all along. Penske to stick with 3 cars for 2023 IndyCar season, also from Racer.com's Marshall Pruitt. Same 3 cars next year. No mention of a 4th car. You got to remember they have the Porsche Penske Motorsports program as well, and you kind of wonder if any of their current drivers, Power, Newgarden, McLaughlin, could maybe play in for the Rolex 24 at Daytona as an extra driver for that. That's about it. There's really nothing new here, and nothing that we expected to be new.
Yeah, nothing to see here. And I think it leads into a conversation now with silly season is, what are we really keeping an eye on outside of that McLaren seat? Because you look at Andretti, okay, we know what their lineup's going to be. Chip has confirmed what his team's going to look like. Penske has confirmed what they're going to look like. So where are the storylines? Do we expect some big movement of the low, I don't want to say lower tier, but the second tier? Do we see moves at Ray Hall Letterman? Do we see moves at Ed Carpenter, depending on Rinus Veekay situation? You look at Coyne, Juncos. Is that kind of where we're at now in terms of driver movement? Because in terms of sexy storylines, in terms of silly season, we're running out of angles outside of that McLaren seat.
Yeah, and speaking of that McLaren seat, Zach Brown telling Marshall Pruitt of Racer.com in regards to Felix Rosenqvist, really the determining factor is I want to put together the best driver lineups across all my racing series, and Felix is in a unique position. He's a race winner in both IndyCar and Formula E. And Zach went on to say, I think he's the only driver to have won in both series, and I would think he's correct. I can't think of anyone else who's done both.
Think so, yeah.
So that is intriguing, and it does make sense when you put it on that angle because of his success in both series. But eventually, I mean, we're going to have an answer. And if Felix is the odd man out, you would think one of these other teams you mentioned would jump at the chance to have him.
Right. I like the spin by Zach Brown because it makes sense. And I think they do trust Felix Rosenqvist to pilot a car in either IndyCar or Formula E. I think he is that versatile. But I do think that Zach Brown has purposely left the door open on the IndyCar side in aiming to try to pick up a quote-unquote better driver for that seat. And I think he's going to exhaust all options for that seat before he confirms Felix Rosenqvist is coming back.
So we'll see how that plays out, and I wouldn't expect an answer soon. Basically, it sounded like months away from that decision being made.
Well, it very much could be over the next rest of the season. It's very much a tryout for Felix Rosenqvist to see how he performs, to see whether he'll be back in IndyCar or back in Formula E in 2023.
And then we had some news on the Indy Lights side that was quite fascinating amongst a few teams. First off, HMD Motorsports, they expect to expand to 6 cars in 2023.
Has anyone ever ran 6 cars in Lights? Like, when's the last time somebody ran that many cars in Lights?
I mean, Schmidt for a long time ran a lot of cars, but I don't know if they ever ran 6.
I think they maybe 4 or 5, maybe. Yeah. I mean, Andretti's always kind of been 3 or 4. It's amazing. It's great.
So Mike Marini, who is leading the team, said that the influence of Series owner Penske Entertainment and Roger Penske has been the biggest influence on lengthening the entry list. Prize money also up, $20,000 to win now, $15,000 for second, $10,000 for third. So that part has gone up. And obviously they still have plans to expand into IndyCar. We touched on that last week as they won a second entry with Dale Coyne Racing next year, and then eventually have their own standalone HMD IndyCar team.
That's how you do it. I mean, it's the grassroots. This is part of the reason we talk. So much is made about the drivers progressing, but it's also a training ground for teams. And HMD, I feel, is doing it the right way. And, maybe you expand next year to maybe a couple races in IndyCar, but I would expect 2024, if things go well, to maybe have a partial IndyCar program for HMD.
And then another name in Indy Lights, Legacy Autosport. They will move up to Indy Lights. They plan to enter 2 cars next season as well. Currently, they field a car for Simon Sykes in USF 2000. This year, they also enter cars in Indy Pro 2000 over the years. So another development. And I did not know this, but the owner of the team, Louis Michael Meyer, great-grandson of Louis Meyer.
I did not know that. That's fascinating. Now, this Legacy Autosport deal, this is where they are going to sell their assets for USF 2000 and Indy Pro 2000 and just compete next year in Indy Lights. So what Indy Lights' gain is a loss for the lower tiers of the Road to Indy.
Yes, so they are selling their USF 2000 and Indy Pro 2000 cars to purchase an Indy Lights chassis. So it's
fine.
That's how it works. Right?
It's how it works. Not every team can continue to expand and add cars at every level. I mean, ideally, that's the way you'd like to see it, but they're making a move to what they see as more lucrative and potentially going forward, maybe partner with an IndyCar team in the next 2 or 3 years, something like that. But you can't blame them at this point, and it definitely helps the fields in Indy Lights for sure.
All right, one name we haven't talked about, and there's nothing new with this, but another name to keep on the radar for IndyCar for 2023, Vassar Sullivan. What do they do? Do they decide to run a team standalone because they used to be partnered with Coyne in the past?
It's a good point, and something that we haven't heard very much about, right? I mean, we've seen, random spots with, Jimmy Vassar's here and there in terms, he's still around the paddock, right? But haven't got a sniff of his plans. And do they want to be a standalone team? That was kind of, at last report, kind of what they wanted to do. But I think we're going to get to this conversation here a little bit later, Caleb, but we're looking at expansion when we look at what Vassar Sullivan could do and what Juncos is planning to do, and maybe Dale Coyne and what they're planning to do, is there's an apex here somewhere, and I don't know if it's 28 cars or 30 or more, where you're going to have to limit the fields, right? At least places like Mid-Ohio and Toronto.
Those are the 2 tracks that said, it's tight when we have more than 24, right?
Yeah, and I see both sides. Like, part of me is like, hey, Mid-Ohio, well, why don't you expand your pit lane? Because do they have Busch Series? What used to be Busch Series? Xfinity. Do they have trucks? I thought they had an Xfinity race.
For where?
For Mid-Ohio.
They have Xfinity.
But they have more than 28 cars, right? In Xfinity? So how are they pulling that off?
Yeah, they have tighter pit boxes.
Okay.
Is my understanding.
So on one side of me is saying Mid-Ohio, you need to figure it out. It's a little bit more difficult for Toronto, obviously. It's the middle of a city. But the other side of me is like, how many cars is too many cars? I mean, some people will say there is no such thing as too many cars. I would disagree, but that's me. And it's a great problem to have. Look, if you would have asked me 5 years ago if this conversation was even be had, I'd be shocked. But I think you're trending in that direction, particularly when you look at a leader circle, that the more full-time entries you add, the less full-time entries are getting that leader circle money, which is right now, what, the top 22? Top 24?
Top 22, we believe.
Yeah. So I think it's a fascinating question as we look at a couple more of these teams now either trying to break into the series or expand their operations. Because you're looking at, if everything falls into place, potentially 30 full-time cars next year. And Cup right now is 36 at most races?
I think they go up to 40.
Yeah, they'll go up if they have some, but most races are 36 cars. I mean, less than a decade ago, you were looking at 21, 22 cars for IndyCar and 43 cars for Cup. Who would have imagined at this point?
No, no one would have thought it would have done the kind of a reversal where Cup, remember, it used to always be 43 was the cap.
Yeah.
And then they lowered it to 40.
Yeah. Now it's 36
and
at
those
some places.
Start and park cars, I mean, that's not a thing anymore, correct?
I don't think so. But I think the only place they really have quote unquote bumping is Daytona, I want to say. Everybody else, you show up, you start.
There may have been some at Talladega this year as well.
Okay. Maybe the super speedway is a little bit, where certain teams only have super speedway cars. But yeah, I think it's a greater conversation to have at some point is how much is too much, because then you look at qualifying and especially on road and street courses, and you're trying to find open areas on track for a clean lap. And it's difficult when you have 23, 24 cars out of there, let alone 30. So, at the very least, if you're going to expand that big, you're going to have to redo, I think, the qualifying format.
All right, so that's everything for 2023 silly season, right?
I mean, as of right now, there's other open questions, but in terms of what we learned over the past week, it was a lot of more confirming things than real movement.
Well, we have one item for 2022 silly season that unfortunately is ongoing. AJ Foyt Racing, a lot of rumors that Rocket has been late or has missed payments, and the number 11 entry that is split between Tatiana Calderon and J.R. Hildebrand came into question in their pre-race release. The number 11 running beyond Mid-Ohio is, quote, not guaranteed due to funding issues with Rocket. And Larry Foyt saying, I know Rocket wishes to continue the program, but there are some issues which may prevent that. We will continue to either resolve it or try to find alternate funding, which is difficult at best at this point. Meanwhile, the 14 is not sponsorship dependent. That car's good to go. Obviously, Kirkwood's Lights scholarship money of $1.2 million significantly helps the bottom line for that entry. Well,
Williams is like, what you're feeling our pain, right? As Rocket was involved with Williams in Formula One. And, unfortunately, if the checks don't come, there's really nothing you can do at this point. So it from reading between the lines and hearing some things, it sounds like Rocket was substantially behind and they've paid some money to catch up, but maybe they're not all the way caught up, or maybe it's at this point a race to race type deal. But it's unfortunate. Is this the second year for Rocket or first?
I think the third, because they came on board in 2020 with Bourdais.
But man, you felt so good because it was a couple full-time cars that were primary sponsor was Rocket, and you're like, okay, this is a step in the right direction for Foyt, and especially after they lost ABC Supply, right?
With the exception of them sponsoring for the 500.
Right. And you felt, okay, this is exactly what they need, and now there's woes about getting checked. So hopefully it works out for Foyt and that 11 car stays on track for the rest of the season. But at this point, it sounds kind of like a week-to-week type thing.
And a name to keep in mind, MarshallBirdofRacer.com points out this tidbit in his article on the situation. With Foyt's growing relationship with Indy Lights frontrunner Benjamin Peterson, the Danish-American driver has been mentioned as a possibility to make his IndyCar race debut with the team. The number 11 car, provided it's available on one of the remaining road courses on the calendar. I would say, unfortunately, I expect that to happen before the end of the season.
Well, and the thing with Tatiana Calderon is that was a Rocket push, wasn't it?
Correct.
They wanted Calderon in that seat.
They wanted her there, and they made it happen.
Yeah, so not to take anything away from Calderon, but I would say if Rocket's on shaky ground, Tatiana Calderon is on shaky ground, because that was an initiative really pushed by the sponsor, from what we understand.
Yes, so that would mean, like you said, I mean, could this weekend be it for her in IndyCar for this season?
It very well could. I mean, could this be the final race ever for Tatiana Calderon in IndyCar? I mean, maybe. Do
we expect Peterson to swoop into that seat with the exception, I mean, he's not going to run the ovals. He's not going to be at Iowa or Gateway. I would think they either wouldn't run the car based on funding, or if they had enough to make it happen, they would just keep Hildebrand in that seat.
Right. I just feel it's a very tough task to thrust an Indy Lights driver into the second half of the season. I mean, this is a guy that's third right now in points behind Linus Lundqvist and Stingray Robb. He's not running away with the championship or anything. I just have a tough time believing that that's the best move for team and driver to really throw him in for the remainder of the season at this point.
Does not have a win, has 3 second-place finishes. So he's knocked on the door.
Knocked on the door, but I think when we look at Devlin DeFrancesco and other guys that we feel that aren't ready yet, I'm not convinced that Benjamin Peterson is ready for IndyCar. I think, he's got, one test under his belt with Foyt? Maybe we see a couple more?
He had the test, I believe, with Juncos Hollinger.
Okay, he did Juncos, not Foyt. Okay, so maybe we see a test with Foyt or something. I don't know if the best idea is putting him in that. Now, the last 1 or 2 races of the season, maybe, but I don't look at it as saying, okay, starting at Toronto, Peterson's going to be in that seat.
Yeah, this will be the storyline, I think, to watch not only this weekend, but next week as well, as far as silly season goes and everything. Yes, we'll have storylines on the track, but off the track, we're still trying to figure out Aaron McLaren SP, and now we have this secondary storyline with Foyt, where we know that 2 of their entries are safe with Dalton Kellett and Kyle Kirkwood, but after that is a massive question mark for the number 11 car for the remainder of the 2022 NTT IndyCar Series season. Okay, we shift to a great article on scheduling for IndyCar that you sent to me, I think, over the weekend from therace.com. Jack Binion, the writer here.
It's full of goodies.
A lot of goodies here. Headline, the key decisions set to shape IndyCar's calendar future. And Mark Miles, interviewed in this piece, said, not sure there'll be any existing races that drop off or new tracks that are added for 2023. But the caveat right after that, but a willingness to promote races itself could pave the way for an exciting future.
How about that for a pivot? I mean, I think this is one of the overarching things before we get into these details that'll break down with Roger Penske and the Penske Corporation taking over IndyCar is before the previous regime, previous owners were like, we're not in the business of promoting races. And
well, except they did every year with the Indy 500 and then the Indy GP.
Well, I mean, a lot of races. How about that? Like, we're not interested in doing that. And whether it was cost, infrastructure, personnel, all the above, that wasn't their stance. And now I think you're seeing the Penske Corporation with the personnel, with the capital, with the proper people and the infrastructure to do that potentially. I don't think you're ever going to see IndyCar want to promote 8, 9, 10, 11 races on their own, but 3, 4, 5 a year outside on top of the 500 and the races at the on the road course, I definitely could see it.
Well, let's look at it now because they're already, I think, promoting close to a half dozen races. You have the Indy 500, it's Penske Entertainment. You have the Indy GP, Penske Entertainment. The Indy Road Course 2, Penske Entertainment. Iowa doubleheader, that's 5. And then
Detroit?
That's, I guess,
Pseudo,
so that's 6.
That's true. Right? And I mean, what we're hearing is, could they examine Homestead as one of those in the future? If Iowa works, could that be a consistent one? They're in this article, they're throwing Milwaukee out there as a potential. So, yep, maybe it could end up getting to 10 races. Who knows?
Well, and also Miles points out they're handling ticketing for these events. Also, their legal department's doing more. If you count Iowa as 2 as well. You throw in Detroit. Obviously, you mentioned the road course races. And he sounds open to promoting. Remember, right, the party line before Penske took over, we're not interested in promoting. They would when they had to. Like, they had to, I think, with Watkins Glen as a fill-in race for Boston back in, 2016 and 17. They did with Phoenix, but that failed. I mean, it's not worked. Not only is it not worked out, I mean, it's failed spectacularly.
Right. Yeah.
With the previous organization promoting events, but now they're looking to do it. And Miles makes it sound like they're truly open to it. He says, as we think about other markets we'd like to be in, I think we're willing to think about being the promoter in the right circumstances. And so that's exciting because I think it gives us more options for getting into places we'd like to be. So you mentioned some of the places they'd like to be. Obviously, they want to stay in Texas. And Miles says he expects Iowa to be successful. Indianapolis is successful. St. Louis is a vibrant event. Texas is the event that they and we would say is great racing this year, but the event is not what we want, not to our expectations. So we're still talking with them, is what Miles said. He also said, we particularly value ovals. We'd like to have ovals before the Indy 500.
Ovals, plural, right?
True.
Not an oval, ovals.
That is true. So you have Texas, and they're having discussions with the new brass at Texas Motor Speedway, and it sounds like they are trying to find a way to make it work. Because, look, they have a product they can sell finally for the first time since about 2017, 2016.
Right.
I mean, the 2019 race was all right, but they've shifted the date around the last couple of years. It's no longer early June night race, so they moved that schedule. And then, quite honestly, the racing tanked as well after about 2017, year by year.
Right.
But like you said, ovals. So what are those ovals? And you mentioned one of them, Milwaukee Mile. The race can confirm that meetings were held between IndyCar and Milwaukee, the Pagoda, during the Indy 500. So it's a right-sized venue for IndyCar, points out 35,000 people that they can fit in that venue. Miles says, we have current discussions about what would have to be done to improve the track at the fairgrounds, and we do all agree whether it would or wouldn't be during the annual July-August Wisconsin State Fair. It wouldn't.
Right. Which, to me, I think ideally the ovals before the 500 would be Texas and Homestead, because you don't have to worry about weather too much. You could look at Milwaukee and say maybe I guess in late April, but you're still playing with fire, right? And I do think that Milwaukee would be helped by the 500 before it and then feeding into it. But it's an interesting point because, the sell when Andretti was promoting it is, it's going to be built around the state fair. And they were really trying to go for that vibe that we see with the Red River shootout. Yes, the shootout between Oklahoma and Texas at the Cotton Bowl during the Texas State Fair, right? We saw similarities. Oh, everybody's going to be here anyway. Let's have a big major sporting event. And it didn't work. So the fact that they don't want to be part of that is an interesting development. And the talk was, there wasn't enough parking during the State Fair anyway to try to do that. So I feel like a midsummer day, I think a June date at Milwaukee, would be, in my opinion, the best scenario.
That's what one would think. Unfortunately, when did Andretti, when they promoted the mile events about a decade or so ago, when were those events held? In June.
But weren't they part of the state fair?
No.
They weren't part of the state fair.
No.
Okay.
But they had a fair-like atmosphere.
Right, yeah,
that's
with
probably
the
what you're
rides and
thinking
all
of,
that stuff. Yeah,
kind of had a midway setup in the infield.
But I mean, from stuff that we've heard from people, that it was poorly promoted. It was not as much as Andretti tried to sell it, what is like Indy Fest or whatever. It just didn't fly. So I think a decade later, maybe a decade more of want of that race to return, and maybe, quite frankly, a better promoting plan under Penske Corporation could revive that thing.
And funny you say that. Dovetails perfectly into Miles' next quote in the article. Miles says, I think that's one of those places where really we would probably step in as the promoter. That's not on the cards for next year, but it's an active conversation.
And I think you're seeing more of a willingness for Penske Corp. And look, Roger Penske is not a billionaire, his corporation, for no reason. He's not going to rob Peter to pay Paul. He wants to, this is a separate entity, IndyCar and IMS and all that, as opposed to his other business dealings. But he can still take a loss easier than the former owners of the series and the track, right? I mean, he's not tied to that bottom line as much as previous regime.
And then at the end of the article, it goes into that proposed race in Argentina. at Termas de Rio Hondo in Santiago del Estero in Argentina, talking with Ricardo Juncos. And I thought this quote was fascinating because we all think, all right, but is the money really there?
The money's there, folks.
Money is there. Asked if funding the event was the biggest problem, Juncos replied, no, I think the difficulty now is to see if IndyCar wants to go or not. We can make it happen. It's just the fact that IndyCar needs to decide. Huh.
Well, until you get that check in hand, folks, and Boston comes to mind and China comes to mind, right? I mean, IndyCar's been burned time and time again from these races that were going to happen, and they got the money and all that, and then the money isn't there. So I really think if you can convince team owners that all expenses will be paid, and then the series that this is going to happen, it's a thing, I think that's the only hurdle. But verbal agreements and signing are great, but until you have that check in hand, right, there's still possibility that it doesn't happen.
It's a shame that IndyCar doesn't have an international shipping partner as a team sponsor.
Yeah.
Oh,
right?
wait.
Maybe
DHL.
they do.
Juncos also points this out. Fans from the likes of Brazil, Paraguay, Chile, Bolivia, and Peru could attend a race in Argentina more easily than those in the States, opening up the series to a continent with a strong fan base. You could throw in, I would say, Colombia as well to that. Yes, but it's all on the same continent.
Yeah, but do you lack the South American star power in the series comparatively to 8 to 10 years ago?
Yes, but you still have Elio. Could Kanan get a one-off? Could Montoya get a one-off, for example? I mean, you still have names and you still have drivers that would be of interest. Would fans from Mexico want, go to see Pato O'Ward? That's another possibility that you have to throw in with that as well. But like you said, you don't have the same level of successful drivers from South America like you had a decade ago, even 5 years ago.
Right. And you mentioned Mexico. Is IndyCar, would they more like to tackle Mexico first and make that happen before they make the jump to South America in terms of logistics and all that? Is that an easier sell to the teams and the series in general, as opposed to having to fly down to Argentina and take everything down? I mean, that could be a legitimate concern as well.
I'd say go where you're wanted and where the money and the check clears.
If the money is there, I don't see IndyCar turning it down. But going back to it, you need that check in the bank, right, before you really commit.
And one final note on all that, it's a favorable time zone for the American audience.
Very true.
And Canadian audience and Mexican audience for that matter.
Yes, absolutely.
So
is it on Eastern?
It might be like Eastern? 1 hour maybe before Central? Or 1 hour forward of Eastern. But either way, it's not a hindrance like Japan or Australia.
Yeah, most definitely.
All right, time to preview Sunday's Honda Indy 200 at the Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course. Taking a look at the schedule this weekend for IndyCar Practice 1, Friday, July 1st. 3:30 to 4:45 p.m. Eastern. Again, all these times Eastern. Coverage on Peacock, IndyCar Live for international, SiriusXM, IndyCar Radio as well. Practice 2 on Saturday, 9:30 to 10:30 a.m. Eastern. Same outlets. Qualifying for IndyCar, 2:45 to 4 o'clock Eastern in the afternoon, Saturday, July 2nd. And then race coverage on NBC this weekend on Sunday, July 3rd. Broadcast window starts at 12:30 for NBC. Green flag time I've seen is 12:53 p.m. Eastern. Also coverage on IndyCar Live, SiriusXM, IndyCar Radio, and Peacock. All right, we look at this race, and we've had a bit more exciting editions of this in recent years than what we had for quite some time. I guess, who is your favorite for this weekend?
The guy on pole. Whoever that is. I mean, the last 3 races, with the 2 in 2020 and the 1 last year, were won by the guy who started on pole. Last year was Joseph Newgarden, Colton Herta in race 2 in 2020, and Will Power in the race number 1 in 2020. So, whoever's on pole come Saturday has a great chance of winning this race. And Joseph Newgarden has been phenomenal the last few races. at Mid-Ohio. So you try to look somewhere else for a winner, but we just keep going to tracks recently that Joseph Newgarden has been able to win really, really good.
Some notes from Trackside Online before we make our official picks. 38 IndyCar winners, the average starting position for Mid-Ohio, 3.5. Pole sitters won 42.1% or 16 times. Winners come from the front row 76.3% or 29 times. Only Scott Dixon, who started 22nd in 2014. Remember, that was the year he started last. There was an early crash and they reworked the strategy. He won there. Then Graham Rahal started 13th in 2015. He pitted right before a caution that I think screwed over Montoya. And Graham resumed the lead after that. Only those drivers have won from outside the first 4 rows on the grid. Scott Dixon, 6 wins. Just Newgarden with 2. Elio, Colton Herta, Simon Pagenaud, Will Power, Graham Rahal, and Alexander Rossi all have 1 win apiece.
And you mentioned Alexander Rossi, and if you're looking for maybe some money to be made, I think, in betting, you look at the finishes for Alexander Rossi since 2017. 6th, he won it in 2018. He was 5th in 2019. He finished 2nd and 3rd in 2020 with the 2 races there and finished 5th last year. So Alexander Rossi, if you're looking for maybe I don't know if it's a sneaky pick, but maybe we feel like Rossi's going to win a race at some point this year. Why not Mid-Ohio based on his recent performances?
And that goes into our 3 key stats for Mid-Ohio from Chad 200. Dixon with 6 wins, 12 top 5s, but just 1 win in the last 8 races here. Power, 9 front row starts, 6 podiums. And you mentioned Rossi's recent performance is the best average finish among active drivers at Mid-Ohio. And a couple other notes for this weekend. A lot of changes for the cars. It's going to be a different look for quite a few drivers. Also for Graham Rahal, his 250th IndyCar start will come at his home track this weekend. So let's look over the changes for the cars. So Scott McLaughlin will be in the Odyssey battery car. That's a change.
That's new, isn't it?
Yes. Marcus Ericsson will drive a green car sponsored by Ridgeline.
Okay.
Then you have Graham Rahal in the Fifth Third Bank car. Simona Di Silvestro will be entered into this race in the 16 car, something to keep in mind. You have Romain Grosjean in the Forever Lawn car, which is green and black. Christian Lundgaard, sponsored by Hendrickson. Similar colors, just a different sponsor for him. And that sums it up. 27 cars entered. I think this is the most we've had at Mid-Ohio in quite some time. And that's another thing to keep in mind. I think 25-foot pit boxes, so it'll be very tight on pit road for these cars.
Which they said last year we had 26, and they said we can make that work in a pinch. 27, they're really pushing it. 28 or more, really difficult.
And then Jimmy Johnson has a modified livery, darker blue with the Carvana car. Rinus Veekay back to the all-orange livery powered by BitNile for his ride as well. Alex Palou back with NTT data on board, kind of the classic look that he has there for him as well. All right, time to make picks. Who do you got?
Well, first of all, I ask you, who has the best odds as of right now per DraftKings to win this race?
I would say Joseph Newgarden.
Joseph Newgarden at plus 400. The rest of the top 5, Alex Palou at plus 500, Pato O'Ward plus 600, Alexander Rossi also plus 600, Colton Herta at plus 700. My pick, Caleb, I'm going to go with, man, I'm trying to think of somebody that I will go Marcus Ericsson with this race.
I'm going to keep it in the team, and I'm going to go with Alex Palou.
I mean, you feel like Palou hasn't won yet. Palou's got to get a win, right? Dixon's got to get a win.
One would think.
And we feel like Rossi has a chance to get a win at some point. So we need to have some of these guys win races. But I'm going to go Marcus Ericsson. You're going Alex Palou. So it's Team Ganassi here at New Track Record this week.
And you're trying to make it 3 straight correct picks. So
unprecedented.
This is a big deal for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the pressure's been on. I've done hours of research and really crunching numbers and just got it down, kind of like Moneyball, just got it down to one number. And that one number led me to Marcus Ericsson.
Is there a war for
wins above replacement?
Yes. For
IndyCar.
They
do need that, right? No war for IndyCar. Let's come up with those analytics.
Or a whip.
Yeah, right. So, due time. Analytics is coming to auto racing.
If you agree or disagree with our picks, we'd love for you to interact with us. You can find us on social media. Our Twitter handle is INDYCAR Podcast. Our Facebook page, just like us at New Track Record. You can also follow us on Instagram, INDYCAR Podcast as well on there. You can email us, newtrackrecordpodcast@gmail.com. And check us out on the web, newtrackrecordpodcast.com. While you're there, check out the store. We have stickers and shirts for sale on the store page on the website. And you can become a patron through Patreon, patreon.com/newtrackrecord. Thanks to Cole, Rob, and others who are patrons of us on there. And as always, you can find us and follow us for free on your favorite podcasting platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Podbean, or wherever you find your podcasts, all for free. All right, Justin, mailbag time. Plenty to discuss despite being an off week. Some comments on the Foyt sponsor updates. Scuba Steve 85 says, sounds like Williams all over again.
Yeah, fool me once, right, with Rocket.
And it seems like it's happening once again. You posed this question that got a ton of responses. Should IndyCar cap its starting fields at a certain number? If so, what's the magic number? 27, 28, 30? We talked about this earlier here in the show, but also earlier in the week because it seems to be a problem. Now, do I expect it to stay a problem next year? No, because we always have turnover. We never get as much increase as they report, but it does start creeping up. So to me, that number is 26, with the exception of obviously 33 at the Indy 500, an Indy 500-mile race that they
You
run.
would cap it at 26.
Yes.
Which is what we're at this year, right? At most races, 26.
Yes.
I'm thinking 28, I feel, is the number. I know some people are kind of, don't cap anything, but
I only argue for 26 because it's tough for Toronto and it's tough for Mid-Ohio.
Yeah.
Which are the same promoter.
Right.
You have to think about that.
Yeah.
And
Green Savory.
You don't want to lose your Toronto event that we haven't had for 3 years now.
Right.
And it seems like they're demand. I mean, the track build has started up there for the Honda Indy Toronto, and it seems like there's demand. I'm just curious how this goes because it's the first race there in 3 years, and it'll be streaming only on Peacock.
I think we can all agree the TV number will be horrendous. Hopefully it's a successful event for the promoters, and it's still Toronto remains a thing. But yeah, some people are going to say, excuse me, what's gained or what's lost?
I'll help you out. I'll take over. A lot of replies here. Jeff Cerneski says, I think it depends on the track, the number of full-time entries, and the safety concerns of the particular track. I think most tracks can safely handle 28 to 30. Toronto, Mid-Ohio, 26. So it's basically the exact kind of back and forth we had. So I could be convinced of that. The Roth says, during the off-season, set a maximum for each track. That tells teams to expect possible bumping, and you won't get part-time entries for those tracks, or tell those tracks they may find themselves off the schedule if they don't add more room.
Which, sounds good in theory, but I don't think IndyCar is in a position to force tracks to do anything. Formula One could do that.
Yes.
With their, the amount of countries that want races. I don't think IndyCar can be in a position to tell Mid-Ohio, a longtime partner, hey, you better expand your pit lane or we're going to go somewhere else.
Also, it's probably in your top 5 healthiest events.
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge. And so when we're looking at the show in general on the weekend, what better way to add some excitement than Saturday qualifying? You better qualify in the top 28 or you're not starting the race on Sunday.
Yeah, they used to have this at Mid-Ohio in the past. This is not like a new thing.
I don't hate the idea of more than just bump day, quote-unquote bump day, being at Indy.
DeGuerra says no, but there should be an introduction of F1-style penalty points to assure quality standards on drivers. They have IndyCar as their own standard, and I don't think they have an issue with that currently.
I don't think so.
Big D Cart says no, let them all race. Poet Shevchenko says cap the field at 33 at the 500. All their tracks should be based on their physical capacity. What I think is the interesting question that follows from that is, how do you handle it? There are more cars than the track can take. And he goes on to say, firstly, I don't think full-time cars will go above any track's capacity. It will be part-time cars causing it, so easiest solution is to arrange ahead of time with teams, so part-time schedules will end up going above track capacity. And in the case that a weekend does have more cars than can run pre-qualifying, drivers who don't make it can race in the weekend's Indy Lights race. It would make qualifying a pretty captivating spectacle and draw more attention to Indy Lights. Problem is, the races that get more entries usually are the races that are in more demand with partners. So the Indy GP, that's going to get more. Right. Nashville, you would think, will get more. I mean, we expect to have 27, maybe 26 if the 11 car isn't there in Nashville here in about a month and change. That's something to think about.
I think the easiest thing is in one of the texters said it is, some of these races, they're going to cap the entries. And for part-time entries, you're going to have to decide, are we going to take a chance and go to Mid-Ohio and potentially not qualify? Or do we play it safe and go to a place like Road America that has plenty of room, right? So
yeah,
I feel like that's a sensible solution to this is, look, some of our events are going to be capped in entries. At least starters. Entries, you could have 50 entries. I don't care. But in terms of you have to qualify in the top 28 to start the race.
Vicky Lane 26 says, I think most tracks can comfortably accommodate 28 cars. Seems like a good number. Human Spectre 1. No cap. We want to encourage teams to add and new ones to form. Laser Disco. I just love that we're even asking this question, right? Who would have thought that? I mean,
yeah, that's the big thing.
5 or so years ago.
Yeah, that's the big thing. And I know everybody, we need to encourage new teams. I think we've done that. I think we've reached that point, right? It's worked. It's worked so well, we're having issues on cars. I don't need to see 38 cars starting at Texas. I really don't.
No.
We saw that happen around that number. How many started at Vegas?
30 or so.
I mean, I know it was a unique situation. I don't need to see 30, 35 cars at a track. That's not, especially when only 22 are making money in the leader circle.
Run_Mark_Run. Depends on the length of the circuit. You could run 50 cars at Road America. Yeah, he mentioned that. Indy Turn 3 gang says no. And says, I remember the first year of the Michigan 500, they had a last chance race to set the back of the field. Continuing on, why TEHF not, one of my favorite handles. Let them all race if the track can't fit that many. Send the slowest qualifiers home. And Zaxi8771, non-500 bumping with a gif of a chicken with that like bewildered look.
Right.
You probably recognize it. But
shocking. Well, here's the thing.
A lot of responses here. A lot of good stuff.
Yeah, here's the thing with people, you want to encourage entries. But you know what this does by capping it? It encourages competitive entries, right? Right now, IndyCar is still in a position where no matter how bad you are as a team, you can enter the IndyCar series. You can be a back marker. Fortunately, right now, we don't have too many of those teams that, we look at and say they shouldn't be out there. But you open that door when you have unlimited entries. And you know what? It becomes a lot more competitive as a series when you say at most of your races, we're only starting 28 or 30. So you better have your crap together and you better be competitive or you're not going to make the race. And I think that's where IndyCar was in its prime, and CART and all that is you had the best of the best, right? At every race. You had to show up and be fast and good. And it didn't matter if you had this driver or that driver.
Well, except from 96 to 2007.
Right. What I'm saying, like the heyday of CART, 80s, 90s, early 90s, is it was the best of the best of the best, right? So if we're talking about returning to the so-called glory days, that's part of it, right? Is you better be a damn good team with a damn good driver if you're going to start races in IndyCar. And I have no problem with returning to that.
All right. And quite the response on Indy Lights. I posted this. Indy Lights is going to have 20-plus cars next year at this rate. Hunters Way 67. The Optimist. Sure hope so. And make them the Saturday headline race when IMSA is not on the weekend schedule. Yeah, don't make them race at like 9 or 10 a.m.
Right.
That can't help. But then Indy Nathan, the Pessimist. It always looks more promising than it ends up being. Seems like some deals always fall through.
Well, we're hearing about who's being added, but we're not yet hearing about which teams could be gone. So it's good. I mean, I feel like the move to under the Penske Corporation umbrella is only going to continue the rise and continued health of the IndyCar or of the Indy Lights series.
I am analog on the Foyt Racing issues for Mid-Ohio as far as sponsorship. How often was a sponsor pulling out, resulting in a driver losing a seat mid-season at IndyCar? I would guess in the 90s and 2000s it happened a lot. Yeah, I think so. That seemed to be more common, but there were more people to back them up and be a replacement.
Definitely.
Run_Mark_Run said, why isn't IndyCar racing at Watkins Glen every year? With a pick from that event.
Not a lot of people showed up.
True. They tried before. And then replies to that the race article that we talked about earlier. Hunter's Way 67, encouraging stuff. The self or co-promotion bit is the way forward, I think, particularly for ovals. Poet Shevchenko, that first point is one I've been making more vehemently recently. IndyCar has been complacent for long enough. And again, that's talking about self-promotion. We've been talking about it for a while. You have Penske, who has promoted races in the past, and it seems like it's finally moving forward that way.
Yeah, it's helping the overall health of the series with Penske Corporation in control, not just the top rung of the ladder.
Replies to Felix Rosenquist's deal. Some of these we didn't get to last week. Brafog, I'm excited to announce that I purchased ground beef, sliced cheese, and hamburger buns at the store today. I have enough condiments for the next month and beyond. I'll confirm whether I'm having cheeseburgers for dinner in due course. Thought that was funny.
Yep.
Hunter's Way 67, typical McLaren non-speak. The reply there. So, look, I get it. People either love or hate this team.
It's good for the sport.
And then replies from our poll from last week, which these are the final results because it was still active last week when we were recording. Who drives the number 7 car for Aero McLaren SP? 34% said Rinus Veekay, 32% Felix, 25% other, 9% Scott Dixon. Some new responses. Hunter's Way 67. I can see AMSP wanting Dixon, but if it comes down to Felix and Rinus, got to stick with a cat. He's been more consistent this year and improving every weekend. Brafog says, I think the timing is right for Dixie to go to Spam. The 8 and 10 cars are competitive for CGR and are both ahead of the 9 in the point standings. Dixie going to Spam would open a seat for VK at CGR, but has he proven himself worthy enough for Chip to offer that opportunity? That is the question.
Well, I mean, when we're talking about, one of the texters made a great point with Felix Rosenquist and Rinus Veekay is, while Felix hasn't done enough, I don't think, to assure himself of that seat, I don't think Rinus Veekay has done enough this year to prove that he's worthy of that seat either at this point. I mean, Felix is 8th in points at this point, and now he's very much helped by that 4th at Indy comparatively to Rinus Veekay at 33rd at Indy, but that's being factored in. The fact that Rinus Veekay finished dead last at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway tells you something, doesn't it?
Yes. Vicky Lane 26, I hope it's Felix, maybe VK. I honestly don't see Dixie leaving CGR before he retires. And Daniel SEM 2004 says, shocker of the century, Lando Norris.
What?
I don't think that's happening. He just got an extension from McLaren. But again, it's funny. It's entertaining, and isn't that what we're going for? So that's a look at the mailbag. News and notes items, not a lot to get to before we wrap things up this week. Alex Palou, the 2021 IndyCar Series champion, up in the ESPYs for Best Driver category. Did you see this? Bob Pockrass, who covers NASCAR, racing content on USA Network will be streamed on NBC Sports website and app, not Peacock.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, funky.
That's tough.
Robert just Wiggins, another app I have to download?
But you can't watch NASCAR on Peacock.
No, I don't care.
Do you see Max Chilton?
I
broke
did.
The time shootout record in the McMurtry Sperling. The VW IDR had the previous record. I was beaten with a time of 39.081 seconds out at the Goodwood Festival of Speed. Watch the video. That fascinating stuff. Electric car, too.
So, good for Max.
Very cool. Robert Wickens, as I mentioned.
Race winner
in the Michelin Pilot Challenge TCR race for Brian Herta Autosport. Congrats to him and Mark Wilkins. Lando Norris on Colton Herta. More opportunities, I guess, for people to get into Formula 1, too. And if it's for someone like Colton, then it's fully deserved.
Do we expect to see him in an FP1 at some point
this year? Yeah, toward the end of the season.
Okay.
I would think so.
Does Pato O'Ward get an FP1?
I would think so as well.
Good. And I get an FP1?
No, sorry. Lola Cars. New owner hopes to take Lola back to Indy. It's from Racer.com. At the moment, it's a single make spec chassis, but could that change down the line? Sure, and I'd like to have Lola in a position to make a credible play at being back at a place like Indy if and when the regulations allow for it. Unfortunately, I don't see that changing in the next, decade.
It's an exciting article to read that gets you thrilled about a potential second chassis. Realistically, it's a ways away.
A long ways away.
Yeah.
I would think IndyCar would go electric before having multiple chassis manufacturers again. Yes.
All electric before multiple chassis?
I think so. Yeah. I do not feel confident.
What about fusion power?
No.
Okay.
Adam
Nuclear?
Stern? No. Adam Stern, Sports Business Journal. The F1 deal, they renewed with ESPN 75 to 90 million per year for rights, up from 5 million annually right now.
That's wild.
It is wild.
Well, it's good because Formula One really could use the money.
Tweet of the week, this from Tony DeZino. Anytime Bernie Ecclestone talks, and it's a gif of Keenan Thompson just saying, nope.
Oh, man.
That sums it up.
He was backing up Nelson Piquet, which I don't know if he was mistranslated or whatever because it was in Brazilian or whatever. That was I haven't seen anything to say, okay, that was possible or not. But he also said he would take a bullet for Vladimir Putin, apparently.
I did not see that.
I don't know if that was part of the same rant or what, but, Bernie. That's all you can say at this point.
Just brutal. All right. Random split air driver of the week time.
All right. We're going to Indy Racing League 2011. We're going back to Ganassi Racing, and we're going to go with Didier Andre.
Hey, I've heard of him.
Yeah, a full year in the series, actually. Didier Andre, born in Lyon, France. He competed in the 1990s in Indy Lights, including 2 years with Pac West Lights, and won a race there. I think he won, Laguna Seca, I think, in Indy Lights.
Yes.
But his 1 year in the Indy Racing League 2011 did the full season, finished 20th in points for Ganassi Racing, was in a G-Force Oldsmobile, and did not qualify for the Indianapolis 500 that year, but did get a 4th at Richmond. His best finish, and I think he had a 10th at Homestead. Those were his 2 top 10 finishes that year. Also competed in the Nissan World Series for a long time. In 2006, he drove in Le Mans, and I believe he won an LMP2.
Yeah, 2003, he won in the LMP 675 class. 15th overall, but first in his class, 3rd in 2005 in LMP2. So had some success at Le Mans as well.
Still in his 40s, so he's still in his prime if you ask Tony Kanaan and Elio Castroneves. But
same age as TK, right?
Yeah, and
47.
Throw Takuma Sato in that mix.
Yeah.
But did just one and done for in Indy Racing League, did an entire season with Ganassi Racing. So Didier Andre, this week's random split era driver of the week.
All right, we'll be back next week to recap the Honda Indy 200 at the Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course, plus any IndyCar news and rumors that come out of the weekend. For Justin Kinney, I am Caleb Hatch. Thanks for joining us on another edition of New Track Record Podcast.
Podcasts by Federated Media.